Millionaire followed his employee after work, and what he discovered made him fall in love. The alarm went off at 4:45 a.m., just like every single day without fail. Juliana opened her eyes before the persistent noise even stopped. Her body ached, from climbing stairs, from past cleanings, from sleepless nights, but she wouldn't allow herself another second of fatigue. Next to her, two little figures still slept soundly, wrapped in thin blankets. Beatrice and Isabella, her girls, her reasons. She rose slowly, as if the floor were made of glass, and each step might shatter the precious silence of the early morning. She made the coffee, packed the lunch boxes, folded the school uniforms. She did everything with the same tenderness you'd use to handle something fragile, because everything in her life was like that, fragile, urgent, too important to get wrong. By 6:30 a.m., showered, hair firmly tied back, she put on her grey maid's uniform. 9-year-old Beatrice helped Isabella slip on her shoes, while Juliana went over the day's instructions again. Stay together. Don't talk to strangers. If it rains, wait under the school's awning. And remember to tell Aunt Marcia if anyone calls for you. A kiss on each forehead, one last look from someone who wanted to stay. But she had to go. The mansion's gate opened automatically, revealing a world completely unlike her own. Every hedge was trimmed to perfection. Every marble step leading to the front door gleamed. Juliana took a deep breath before ringing the bell. A housekeeper answered and simply pointed toward the kitchen. No words, just gestures. Eduardo Marquez, her employer, hadn't appeared yet. Inside the kitchen, everything was labeled, organized, sterile as a laboratory. Juliana wasn't intimidated. She began working in silence, cleaning with precision and care. It was her first day, and she wouldn't make mistakes. She couldn't. With every tick of the wall clock, she reminded herself she must leave exactly at 5 p.m., no delays. Around 10 a.m., she saw him for the first time. Eduardo descended the stairs with firm steps, clad in a dark grey suit and an impassive gaze. He glanced at her briefly, then diverted his eyes to the newspaper. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask her name. He simply ordered coffee. "No sugar," he murmured, without looking up. Juliana nodded silently and complied. During lunch, she heard his voice again, this time over the phone. Quick commands, surgical decisions, sentences that sounded like verdicts. He was a man of few words and many results, running one of the country's largest tech companies. To Juliana, he seemed to live on another planet, cold, silent, full of remote controls and automatic doors. At exactly 5 p.m., Juliana switched off the last appliance, hung the tea towel just so, and slipped out the side door. The morning driver was gone. She walked steadily to the nearest bus stop, carrying a bag of groceries she'd discreetly bought with part of the advance she'd asked from her supervisor. The bus crawled down the avenues. Juliana drifted for a moment into memories. The day she'd learned her sister had died, Simone, hit by a luxury car whose driver had fled. The case was quickly buried. No one took the blame. Since that day, Juliana carried not only the pain of loss, but the responsibility for her nieces. By the time she got home, night had already fallen. Beatrice ran to the gate. Isabella followed, clutching a drawing. "Aunt Ju, I drew us at the park." Juliana crouched down and hugged them both tight. She felt like the world might try to tear them away at any moment, and she wouldn't let it, ever. Inside, dinner was simple: rice, beans, and scrambled eggs. The girls ate, giggling over their school stories. The small TV in the corner crackled as it flipped channels. The house was modest, peeling paint, donated furniture, but there was a warmth there that mansions like Eduardo's could never know. Later, after the girls were asleep, Juliana washed the few remaining dishes and stared at her own reflection in the dark window. This was only the first day, one of many to come. She knew life would demand more, But she also knew that despite everything, she still had strength inside her. And in that nighttime silence, no luxury, no promises, she made a pact with herself. No matter how harsh or unfair the world might be, as long as she could love and protect those girls, she would endure. Eduardo Marques had always been a man of timepieces. On his wrist, a Swiss perpetual calendar watch. In his office, an old wall clock that chimed every half hour with almost military precision. In his routine, every minute was accounted for, categorized, justified. That's why he noticed her. It wasn't the spotless uniform, nor the nearly invisible way she moved through the house. It was the internal clock they seemed to share, only used in opposite ways. While Eduardo tallied minutes to produce more, Juliana counted down minutes to leave, always at exactly 5 p.m., without looking back, without asking for anything, without trying to stand out. At first, it irritated him. There was something defiant about that behavior, as if she had a more important world waiting for her outside, something beyond his control, something that intrigued him. Eduardo, accustomed to knowing everything and predicting behavior, began to pay attention. The small gestures, how she dodged personal calls, how she swiftly tucked a photograph into her bag when she thought no one was looking, and above all, the way she grew tenser as the clock neared quitting time. One Friday afternoon, curiosity overcame reason. He watched her from the window as she left. He waited a few minutes, grabbed his car keys and, without telling anyone, followed her. The neighborhood where she got off the bus felt like another world. Narrow streets, crooked lampposts, simple houses stacked like pieces of an improvised jigsaw puzzle. Eduardo parked well down the block, avoiding attention with his dark luxury car. On foot, he kept enough distance to remain unnoticed. That's when he saw her, laughing. Juliana, the reserved, silent woman, was running with 2 little girls in the yard of a modest home, using an old sheet as a superhero cape. The children giggled, their bare feet kicking up the dirt. There were toys made from plastic bottles, a clothesline with tiny garments, and a bicycle with a flat tire leaning against the wall. The house's light was yellow and dim, but the place pulsed with warmth. Eduardo stood there in the shadow of a tree, racked with guilt for spying. He watched Juliana crouch to tie one of the girl's shoelaces, kissing the top of her head with a tenderness he'd never known existed outside TV commercials. She looked whole, even in a setting so far removed from what he considered worthy. There was no luxury, but there was something he'd never experienced his entire life. Genuine coziness. He returned to his car in silence. The clock on the dash blinked. 6:23 p.m. In the days that followed, he could no longer see Juliana the same way. The quiet, methodical woman had become a riddle wrapped in layers. Who was she, really? How could she maintain such composure, such dignity, living under such limited conditions? And above all, why did it bother him so much? One afternoon, as she was sweeping the porch, Eduardo appeared with an unfamiliar expression. Not that of an employer, but of someone searching for something. "Do you have children?" he asked bluntly. Juliana stopped. She dabbed her hands on her apron, wary. "No, I have nieces. I've been raising them since my sister." She hesitated, avoiding his gaze. "Since she died." Eduardo simply nodded. He wanted to ask more, but her expression was enough to silence any further words. That night, as he reviewed company reports, the image of the girls running in that yard returned vividly. That simplicity, that raw, spontaneous love, was something he couldn't buy, nor delegate. For the first time, he felt small inside his own empire, and so, without realizing it, Eduardo Marques, the man of clocks, schedules, and absolute control, began running late. Not to meetings, but in understanding exactly what was changing inside him. The following days were marked by small changes, nothing dramatic, just nuances. Eduardo began greeting Juliana with a slight nod. Occasionally, he'd leave a cup of coffee ready in the kitchen before she arrived. Sometimes he asked simple questions. Did you sleep well? Are the girls okay? But without prying. Juliana found it odd. She didn't quite understand the sudden attention. Still, she couldn't deny that his new approach made the atmosphere less cold. Even so, she kept her guard, maintaining a safe distance, giving short answers, always careful. That Tuesday, the mansion's landline rang just before noon. The housekeeper who answered came into the kitchen with a worried look. It's the girls' school. One of them has a fever. Miss Juliana isn't answering her cell. Juliana, who was washing dishes, immediately dropped everything and hurried to dry her hands. I'll go. I have to leave now. Please tell Mr. Eduardo I'll drive you, he said, appearing suddenly in the doorway. She stopped, surprised. You don't have to. I can take the bus. It's quick. We're still on the clock. I'll take responsibility. Grab your bag. Juliana hesitated, but faced with his firm and strangely kind expression, she only nodded. The drive to the school was silent. In the car, Eduardo drove attentively, glancing at Juliana only once in a while. She was restless, staring at her phone, trying to call again. When they arrived, they were led to the infirmary. Beatrice sat with red cheeks and watery eyes. Isabella stood beside her, holding her sister's hand. Aunt Ju, Beatrice murmured, trying to smile. Juliana hugged her gently. She checked her temperature, listened to the teacher's instructions, thanked her. When she turned, she saw Eduardo standing in the doorway, watching in silence. Isabella recognized him right away. You're the man from the big house, she said innocently, pointing. Juliana blushed. He's my boss, Isa. Eduardo smiled and knelt down to be at the girl's level. I'm Eduardo. And you are? I'm Isabella, piped the younger girl. Beatriz, the older one replied in a small voice, still feeling unwell. Your sister will be fine, he said, sounding more confident than he expected. A fever goes away faster when someone cares for you. On the way back, Juliana sat in the back seat with Beatriz in her lap. Isabella sat up front, delighted by the ride. During the trip, she told stories, pointed at things outside the window, and asked how old he was and why his car didn't smell like popcorn like Aunt Marcia's. Eduardo answered patiently. At some point, he caught himself smiling. They arrived home. Juliana thanked him and, with a look that mixed confusion and gratitude, closed the gate. Eduardo stayed in the car a few seconds before starting the engine. For the first time in a long while, he wanted to stay a little longer. Inside, as Juliana made tea for Beatrice, she found herself staring out the window, not at the car, but at how Isabella talked about Eduardo, how he'd knelt to talk to them, how for a moment he'd seemed human. She realized something had shifted, small, almost imperceptible, but there, and it made her nervous, because the last time she let herself trust, the world had taken Simone from her. That night, while tucking Beatrice into bed and watching Isabella scribble with chalk on the living room floor, Juliana found a forgotten paper in the girl's backpack, a drawing of 3 people holding hands, Isa, Bea, and Aunt Ju, and beside them a man in a suit with a big smile. The caption, carefully written, read, "The nice man from the fancy car." Juliana didn't know whether to smile or cry, but she knew right then that the door between their worlds had already begun to open, whether by the children's will, the broken silence, or perhaps something bigger that she didn't yet understand. It was late afternoon when Eduardo decided to dive into a stack of old documents in his office. The board required that some contracts and authorizations signed years ago be re-evaluated for an internal audit. Bureaucratic stuff, routine, something he usually delegated. But this week, he wanted to keep his mind busy. He sat down in front of the screen and began opening digital folders, letting his eyes scan the lines. Clauses, approvals, formal communications. Everything looked the same. until one heading caught his attention. Traffic incident involving Glasstec employee, filed. He opened the file, a scanned PDF of a terse report, a brief description, a hit and run. The victim, a woman. The driver, Paulo Soares, former operations director. The text said the company would handle the legal procedures and that there was no direct corporate involvement, even though the car was registered to the company. Eduardo kept reading, his eyes starting to race. Below, an attachment, a blurry image of the victim's ID card. He froze, Simone Albuquerque. His mind refused to accept it, but his heart recognized her instantly. The photo, slightly out of focus, showed a woman with a restrained smile and gentle eyes. It was her, Juliana's sister. His stomach churned. His heart, until then governed by methodical routines, pounded wildly. He scrolled back to the top of the document, rechecked everything, as if hoping to find proof he was mistaken. But there was no doubt. The name, the date, the photo, it was Simone. He scrolled to the bottom of the report. Signature, Eduardo Marques. His hands began to tremble. How? When? Why would he have signed something like this? He searched the company's internal archives, found emails from that time, quick, cold corporate memos. Paulo had requested a sensitive handling of the case to avoid negative exposure. Eduardo vaguely remembered the accident, just another incident in a long list. A 3-line verbal summary, employee involved in civilian accident. He'd trusted the legal department, signed without reading, like so many times, but this time, it was different. He stood, struggling for breath, walked to the window and watched the darkening sky. He felt filthy. Complicit in something monstrous, not just because of the tragedy, but because now it had a name, a face, a family, and he knew that family. He lunched with them, played with the children. He knew Juliana, and without realizing, he'd been part of what destroyed her life. He spent the night awake, pulled up more documents, called a former company lawyer, forced an uncomfortable conversation. He demanded every detail and learned what had really happened. Paulo had been drunk. The victim was crossing the street with shopping bags. He fled. The car was quietly repaired at a private garage. A silent deal was struck with a local official. The company covered the costs and closed the case as an isolated incident unrelated to work. Eduardo listened in stunned silence. When he hung up, his hands felt numb. He closed his laptop, picked up his phone. He thought of calling Juliana, but what would he say? "I'm sorry, I was complicit in your sister's death, but I didn't know." There was no phrase to contain that kind of grief. In the early hours, hunched over his desk, Eduardo made a decision. He would not let this remain buried. Not this time. And if the price was the ruin of his own reputation, so be it. Something greater mattered now, not for blind justice, but for redemption. For the first time in a long while, Eduardo wanted to do what was right, even if it was far too late. The address was unassuming, tucked away from downtown and far from any cameras. A small restaurant with dark wooden tables and dusty windows, deliberately chosen by Eduardo. Here, anonymity was almost guaranteed. Paulo Soares arrived late, wearing the same arrogant air as always. His dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, an expensive watch on his wrist, and a mocking smile. "Eduardo!" he exclaimed, arms wide as if greeting an old friend. "Finally decided to grab a beer with me after all those boring meetings?" "Have a seat, Paulo," Eduardo said, his tone flat. No smiles, no pleasantries. Paulo sat, still relaxed. He ordered a whiskey and crossed his arms, studying his former boss. "What's up? Something wrong at Glasstec? A new scandal?" Eduardo slid a folder across the table. Paulo opened it and skimmed the contents. When he recognized the papers, he froze, and his grin vanished. "That's ancient history. We already dealt with it," he tried, forcing a laugh. "Nothing has been dealt with. It was just covered up." "You signed off on it, Eduardo. Don't you remember?" You backed me. I trusted you, Eduardo shot back firmly. You gave me forged documents, manipulated reports. What you did wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Paulo leaned back in his chair. And what, did you come here to clear your conscience? Eduardo discreetly pulled out his phone. A recording app was already running. I came to hear you confirm it. Confirm what? That a woman was accidentally hit? That yes, I was drunk, but the company fixed it because it was best for everyone's image? You killed the sister of the woman who works in my house, Paulo. She's raising her 2 nieces alone. You destroyed a family. Silence fell. Paulo let out a nervous chuckle. Look, Eduardo, are you really going to make this your problem? Ruin everything you've built over a cleaning lady? Eduardo stood up calmly. It's not about her, it's about me. Because I can't keep living a lie you wrote and I signed. He walked away, leaving Paulo speechless. In his car, Eduardo stopped the recorder. The confession was all there, every word. That would be enough. Over the next few weeks, he initiated legal proceedings with lawyer Carlos. The evidence, dossier, recordings, and internal emails was handed to the public prosecutor's office. The case ballooned too big to ignore. Glastech's board reacted with fury. Directors demanded explanations. Some pushed for a settlement, others for his immediate resignation. Eduardo stood firm. I am no longer useful as the face of a company that prioritizes profit over truth. Do what you will with my position, but I'm taking this to the end. He formally resigned as CEO and publicly disclosed the cover-up, fully owning his part. That same week, he transferred a significant sum into an account set up for Beatrice and Isabella, a fund to ensure their schooling, health, and housing. It was a little compared to the absence of their mother, but it was all he could give. Eduardo, the methodical businessman, became headline news. Ex-CEO exposes crime cover-up at his own company. The media devoured the story. Some called him a traitor, others hailed him as a hero. He didn't care. One late afternoon, he entered his apartment, now quiet, empty, with no secretaries or drivers. He walked to the safe, took out Simone's folder, and touched her photo. He thought of Juliana, of the moment she would learn the truth. But for now, all he could do was keep going. Because the price of truth wasn't just money, status, or power. It was the chance to, for the first time, live with dignity. The afternoon sun streamed through Eduardo's wide apartment windows, illuminating glass surfaces and light-colored furniture. Juliana knelt in the hallway, scrubbing the floor in rhythmic strokes, lost in her thoughts. The girls were fine that morning. Beatrice had drawn a flower with their mother's name in the center. Isabella was practicing writing family in big, wobbly letters. Juliana smiled, remembering them. As she gathered some papers left out in the living room, something slipped from between the pages of a thick book on the coffee table. A brown envelope, creased from folding, bearing the handwritten name Simone Albuquerque. Juliana froze. Her heart pounded, her fingers trembled, but curiosity, maybe instinct, won out. She opened it. Inside were stapled, stamped pages with official letterheads. She recognized a police report. Her vision blurred as she read the first page, the date, the description. Female victim. Hit and run. Driver did not remain on scene. Corporate vehicle. Her stomach lurched. The cold, formal text clashed with her warm memory of her sister's smiling face. She kept reading. Then she saw it. Document reviewed and filed at the request of the board. Approved by Eduardo Marquez. She read it again. And again. Her hands shook. Simone, her sister's name, on a sterile report, in a case quietly shelved. A death stamped and signed by the man who she'd believed was trying to help her. She let the envelope drop as if it were on fire. She raced to the kitchen and washed her face. She fought for breath. Eduardo, Was it really him who'd signed that? The same man who'd picked up Beatrice from school, who smiled at Isabella, who left coffee ready for her? Was this real? She grabbed her purse and her things. Without a word, she hurried down the stairs and out the front gate, not looking back. That night, Eduardo came home to an eerie silence. Juliana was gone. The house was clean, but empty. On the kitchen counter lay the open envelope. When he saw what had happened, he knew. He sank onto a chair, defeated. He dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again. "Juliana, please, listen to me. I didn't know. I swear. I only found out afterward. I'm trying to make this right. Give me a chance to explain." But she didn't answer. Or if she heard him, she didn't reply. In a small, dark room, Juliana wept silently, curled up on a bed in a friend's spare room. The girls slept, exhausted by the sudden move. They didn't understand why they'd left so fast. Juliana hadn't explained. How could she? The old pain of losing her sister washed over her in a huge wave, now layered with a new betrayal. That trust, that glimmer of justice. It all felt like a lie. She remembered Eduardo's smile, his unexpected kindness, and now his signature sealing Simone's death as a resolved matter. Her heart didn't know where to put all this. Back in his living room, Eduardo stayed awake all night, thinking, suffering, guilt-ridden, knowing that however much truth he spoke now, it might be too late to be heard. Eduardo's apartment felt bigger since Juliana left. The silence that once felt comforting had become suffocating. Every corner held a reminder of her. The tea towel folded just so, the faint scent of soap on the towels, a drawing from Isabella stuck to the refrigerator door. He wandered through the space like a stranger in his own life. The morning after Juliana vanished, Eduardo did what he had to. He went in person to the public prosecutor's office, carrying documents, copies, and recordings. He officially filed the complaint, signed his resignation as company president, and rejected any settlement offers. He was ready to be prosecuted, judged, and exposed. Truth came first. It was all he had left. The scandal broke instantly. Headlines, TV shows, endless speculation. The image he'd spent decades building crumbled before his eyes. Investors pulled out. The company's market value plunged, but he no longer cared. He moved out of the luxury apartment, handed the keys back to the building manager, and took only the essentials. He found a new place, simple, compact, on a street without private security or automatic gates. For the first time in years, there was no receptionist in the lobby, just an old man who watched the front with a battery-powered radio and a worn chair. He settled in. No driver, no secretary, no status. Just quiet. Juliana, meanwhile, had taken refuge with the girls in a small house on the outskirts of a distant neighborhood. An old friend had lent them a room in exchange for help with her own children. It was cramped, noisy, and makeshift. But it was safe. And for now, that was what she needed. The girls asked about Eduardo almost every day. "Will he come pick us up again?" Isabella would ask as she drew. "Is he mad at Aunt Ju?" Beatrice asked more quietly. Juliana had no answers. She simply hugged them tighter. The nights were long, and between chores, when the world slowed down, she took out the envelope she'd received a few days after fleeing. A letter, handwritten in a steady but slightly trembling script. "Juliana, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I have to try. I learned about Simone far too late, and when I did, I felt as if everything I'd built stood on filthy sand. I signed that document without knowing, but that doesn't absolve me. Not in my own eyes. Since then, I've reported everything, turned in those responsible, resigned from the company, gave up what I had because I couldn't live with it any longer. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth. And If one day it's possible, I'd like to make amends however I can, even if only from afar. With respect, Eduardo." She read the letter once, then again, and again. She put it away, reread it days later, but never replied. Her hurt was too deep, the pain still raw, yet something inside her was beginning to shift. In his new home, Eduardo kept a simple routine. He worked as a consultant for small businesses. He cooked his own lunch. He walked to the grocery store. And every night, before bed, he looked at the same photograph on his dresser, Beatriz and Isabella smiling with paper flowers in their hair. He didn't know if he'd ever see them again, but he held on to hope. Because sometimes, even in the deepest silence, life is waiting to bloom. It was a warm afternoon, the sky overcast and the wind whistling softly down the streets. Eduardo sat on the small balcony of his new apartment, cradling a mug of now cold tea in his hands. He had learned to live with the silence. Not the same comfortable, chosen silence as before, but a dense quiet filled with waiting. That's when the intercom buzzed. He stood up, his heart pounding, and answered cautiously, his voice low. "Hello? It's me, Juliana." He almost dropped the handset. "Come up, please," he managed, striving for calm. It took just over a minute, but felt like an eternity. When she appeared at the door, it was as if the whole world stopped. She looked different, tired, but standing strong. Her eyes were steady, her hands clasped in front of her, and behind them lay an ocean of emotions she didn't yet know how to name. Eduardo invited her in. She declined the tea, wanting straight to the point. "I've read your letter, more than once. I thought you might," he whispered, eyes downcast. "You really filed the report?" He rose, opened a drawer, and returned with a thick envelope. Documents, official protocols, receipts, recordings, transcripts of his confession. Proof that he hadn't just spoken the truth. He had backed every word with action. Juliana read in silence, turning each page with care. When she finished, she faced him. "You lost everything?" "Everything material, yes," he replied. "But I have no regrets." She drew a deep breath. Her voice trembled but held steady. "I'm still angry because you were there, and even unintentionally you were part of it. I know, but I also saw what you did afterward. The courage it took." Eduardo met her gaze, saying nothing more. Juliana moved forward slowly and sat down across from him. The next words were hard but clear. "I forgive you, Eduardo." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was freeing, like an old wound finally beginning to heal. "The girls, they ask about you almost every day," she said in a softer tone. "Especially Isabella. She said you disappeared all of a sudden." He gave a sad smile. "I never wanted to disappear from them. I just thought I had no right to come back." Juliana lowered her eyes to the envelope of documents. "Maybe you do now." In the weeks that followed, Eduardo's return to the girls' lives was gradual. First a visit, then a trip to the park. At their second meeting, Isabella threw herself into his arms as if they'd never been apart. Beatriz was more reserved, but bit by bit she opened up, her happy memories too strong to dismiss. Eduardo relearned the value of small things, teaching multiplication tables, fixing a toy, watching the same cartoon for the umpteenth time. Each gesture, each moment, was its own kind of redemption. Juliana, in turn, began to see him differently. Not the man in the expensive suit who'd signed away her sister's life, but someone who'd fallen, owned his fall, and risen again with honesty. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Juliana and Eduardo sat at the table in her modest kitchen, tea in hand, the lamp's glow soft. "Do you know what hurt me the most?" she asked. "What?" "Learning to trust, then losing it." And now, he ventured, looking at her sideways. She paused for a moment. Now, I'm relearning, slowly. He nodded. This time, the silence between them was an ally. The bond that had been fractured was now being rebuilt, not out of duty or guilt, but by choice, by affection, by something still yearning to bloom despite the pain. The house was modest, with light-colored walls, a small garden and a gate that creaked when opened. Nothing about it resembled the days when Eduardo lived surrounded by luxury and silence. Now the daily soundtrack was made up of laughter, clattering pots, the girls calling down the hallway, and the music Juliana played while cooking. It was a home. Eduardo woke up early, as always, but now for different reasons. He made the coffee, helped the girls with their homework, and organized his consulting projects. There were no meetings in mirrored skyscrapers or conference rooms with 20 chairs, just video calls, small businesses, simple plans, and above all, purpose. Juliana had started a technical course in business administration. She came home from classes each night, tired-eyed but bright, speaking with excitement about what she was learning, the future she could build, and how she planned to launch a small business of her own. Eduardo listened, encouraged her, and worked through the numbers by her side. Beatrice now took part in a school book club. Isabella had joined the children's choir. They both had new uniforms, new backpacks, and finally could say they had plans for tomorrow, something that for so long had seemed like a privilege reserved for others. The case against Paulo Soares moved forward steadily. With the evidence submitted, he was tried and convicted. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and justice. Juliana didn't celebrate. She simply closed her eyes for a moment and said, "Now she can rest." That same week, Juliana and Eduardo took the girls to the park. It was Sunday, and the wind blew strong through the trees. Isabella ran, flying a makeshift kite, while Beatrice sat reading under a shaded tree. Eduardo watched from the grass, feeling a peace he had never known. "Daddy, help me with the kite!" Isabella called out, excited. He froze for a heartbeat. "Daddy!" The words slipped out light and spontaneous. Natural. Juliana, standing beside him, glanced his way. He lowered his eyes, swallowing the emotion rising like a wave. He walked over to his daughter, helped her lift the kite, laughed with her, ran and shouted with delight. Later, with tears still in his eyes, he looked at Juliana and Beatriz. They both smiled. No words were needed. There simply was no need for words. Eduardo had lost his fortune, his title, his position, but he had gained something infinitely greater, a family. And in that simple moment of a park, a kite against the sky, a child calling Daddy, he found at last what his soul had been searching for without even knowing, the place where he truly belonged. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.